Hello, Paul, and Happy New Year to you, although it's a little bit belated.
Happy New Year to you too, Karen. Yeah, it is a little belated, but it's always good. I end up saying Happy New Year to people right through into June and July, when you bump into them for the first time, you haven't seen them in months. So I
Why
always
do you,
like to
why
do
do you
that.
do that? Just because it's a nice greeting, I suppose.
Because it's a nice greeting. But also, it's actually true because I wouldn't have seen them. You sometimes bump into people in May and June. And you go, "Oh, first time Happy New Year!" Of course, everybody kind of gets it, which is pretty good.
Yeah, bit of a pun there as well. And I think this year is going to be phenomenal. I don't know why or what or how, but well, it's already kicking off in certain parts of the world, isn't it? It's a bit hot. If you're in California, parts of California, it's devastating what's going on there. So lots to I don't know if that's looking forward to, but lots of things I think are going to take place in 2025. What do you think?
I suppose if the first, what day are we on now? 13th, is it today? 14th? If the first 14 days are anything to go by, if they're indicative, I think we're going to have a spectacular year. I hope it's going to have some good stuff in it. At the moment, though, it's all being crazily bonkers and very dramatic stuff. But yeah, it does look. I mean, I've still got. I always start off the year being pointlessly optimistic. Even now, I just, it's like a really bad habit. I go, well, it's a brand new year, so let's be really positive about things. So I usually am. By the time we get to the end of January, early February, most of that stupid naivety will have worn off. But for the first few weeks, I always feel, yeah, come on, in spite of everything
Yeah.
that's crazy, some good stuff. Some good stuff could potentially happen this year, and certainly many things are going to happen. I'm sure of it. But
I
I
agree with you.
guess
I
we're going
think a
to
lot of,
see.
yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff. I think a lot of people, I mean, as you know, I'm over in Costa Rica at the moment, hence you've got some
Very
palm
nice,
trees.
eh?
It is very,
Yes.
it's very warm, but it is grey and it's raining. Whereas I understand in England it's cold, but it's blue and it's shiny, which is a lovely winter day you're having.
It is. It
But it's
is. Yeah, it is.
interesting,
It's
yeah, because people that I'm speaking to on my travels around the country from various other countries, a lot of them are kind of getting it a little bit. I'm sowing my seeds here and there, just mentioning a few things, but a lot of people seem to know that something isn't quite right, which is to me very reassuring because they're beginning to open their eyes and do a little bit of critical thinking. And I think that might be where the change could come, where a lot of people get really fed up with what is happening to us and maybe start, complaining in a bigger way. But I think also so much is happening so quickly, whether it's weird, mysterious fog or fires or new rules and regulations. It's not giving us a chance to kind of breathe and take it in and complain about it because then the next thing is coming on board, isn't it? It's a bit,
that's
they're,
right.
they're, they're, they're shoving out. Maybe they're frightened, whoever they may be.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I always think, like the fires that you've mentioned. I was talking about these the other week, and when were the last fires in Hawaii? Were they 2 years ago? Or was it
Maui,
Maui? Maui.
Maui. I think it was last year. I think it was last
You
year.
see, this stuff just goes down the memory hole so fast because
Yeah,
there's just a bombardment of one drama after another. And I've often felt that there must be somebody sort of like in an office somewhere, or maybe more than one person, who's got the sort of stage play all written out. And this year is going to be really hectic. There's going to be loads and loads of acts. And the audience can't actually digest what's just happened because you're moving on to the next thing. So it's as if once you get a sort of sniff of where the problem might lie, there's not much detective work takes place to sniff out the culprits because bang, something else has happened and it's overwhelmed to a degree.
yeah,
It feels
yeah.
like that. It feels like that.
Yeah, it is. And I was chatting to somebody else in my travels, and they were saying I didn't realize, but 2028 I think is the Olympics in Los Angeles. So I don't know if they want to do a
Yes.
rebuild at the expense of the international monetary funds, wherever that money coming in for the Olympics. It just
Isn't
makes you
it
wonder,
isn't it
doesn't it?
Pacific Palisades where that's one of the that's one of the
Yeah,
areas that's been hit by this
yeah,
event, let's call it that. And yeah, I'd read that too. You wouldn't put anything beyond them, of course. I think there's a history of fires throughout history. There's a history of it throughout history. Bloody hell, listen
yeah.
to me. But there
But that makes
is.
sense. We get it. Yeah,
And yeah, and even with the fire of London, the causative reasons for that are not the ones that we've been given at all,
yeah,
because it resulted in a remapping of London along Freemasonic design lines, and that was also in the year 1666. And you know how they like their numbers, right?
yeah,
Very much so. So there's that. You had the Great Fire of Chicago in 1872. which I was thinking about the other day. I mean, it's only sort of 7 years after the end of the war between the states. I don't call it the Civil War. There's nothing civil about it. It's not really a good description for it. But they burnt Chicago down. And there are these huge sort of conflagrations that suddenly just sort of happen. And of course, in the States now, Maui and now California have been the latest too. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, what a great way. There was also that weird stuff about insurance policies all being cancelled with about 10 days to go. So they don't have to pay out on all these burnt houses. And then I saw something the other day about the blue. I think the blue has cropped up. So weren't many houses protected if they were covered in a certain blue in Maui? And this has been a
Yes,
similar event
yeah,
in and
in
around Los
LA.
Angeles. Yeah. Mm.
And I don't know how true it is, but I heard, because a lot of celebrities I think did suffer and have lost their beautiful homes. But I was told that Hunter Biden's son, no, Hunter Biden is the son, isn't he? I think his
Mm.
was safe. So it's just
Oh, well,
really, I
that's
don't know
good.
how, yeah, if, yeah, bless him. If you are having these massive, fires that are created by the wind and wherever they're coming from, how can you protect one house? So I don't know if that's true or not. It could just be a bit of gossip, but who knows? But in
It's
interesting
tricky.
times, it is. And
Very. Yeah.
another thing, another person I met on my travels over here was a lady from Washington DC, and
Yeah.
she takes people on tours about the geometry, the sacred geometry of all the buildings in the capital of the US of A, which I thought, oh
Yeah.
my God, that was so interesting. So that's interesting what you're just saying about the fire of London. It was wiped out so they could rebuild, Masonic lodges or churches or whatever it is they choose to build on these lines, and the same for Washington. So what do you think
Hmm.
about that? Just
Yeah,
interesting.
no, it's true. I think is it the Potomac? There's a river there. I think it's the Potomac. Maybe I don't know if it's still called that. But on early maps of the US capital as it now is, um, it was called the Tiber.
Mm.
The river there is called the Tiber. And the influence, the Masonic influence, and also the influence of the Catholic Church on the design of the capital, a sort of hybrid version of the Catholic Church, a kind of Masonic infused. It all gets very complicated in a way. There's all these little sort of agencies pushing this way and that. But I think it's built on land that was owned by very prominent Catholics of a time. This is rather odd in the sense that America is, of course, portrayed as a Protestant, a place that was settled by Protestants. But in fact, there's much in the architecture of the capital that's reflective of Jesuit and Roman Catholic influence, including the goddess that's on the top of the Capitol building, whose name I
Wow.
forget, but it's part of the canon of sort of ancient gods that were morphed into Christianity when they sort of nationalized it under Constantine, 1700 years or so ago. So
Yeah.
it's really all in front of us. It's just that no one, of course, has ever given you the guidebook to it. But the
Yeah.
guidebook exists. It's just that it's spread through thousands of other books and little articles and stuff like that. But it's all there. Yeah.
It's all there. That, I think that's how you get your information, is it by research and reading and talking to people. So
Yeah,
that's why I
I think
think
so.
yeah, but you can retain that information. I can't. I'm like a sponge. It goes in, it sort of goes out the other end. I know of it. I know it's happening, but I can't bring the dates and the names and the places. But that's why you're absolutely brilliant at this, and that's why I love having these chats, because you just come out with all these facts and figures and stuff like that. But so we said we'd go with the flow on this conversation, but I would love to talk about banks, especially as we've already brought up Washington. So banks and kind of the money system. A lot of people do know how it's created and everything, but for those maybe that aren't quite sure or just need a reminder, can you maybe give us a recap about money and the banking system?
Sure, yeah. It's knowing quite where to begin. Should we start in Babylon? We could start in Babylon for
Let's
us.
start in Babylon.
We could
Go on.
start in Babylon. There's a book called The Babylonian Woe by, I've forgotten his first name. Astle is his second name, Astle. The Babylonian Woe. It's not a particularly easy book to read, actually. It's a bit clunky the way it's written, but it looks at the formative arrival of usury within human affairs. And usury is also catalogued on a lot of these ancient clay tablets, the ones that they dig up from time to time with cuneiform writing. And this is to do with Mesopotamia and all of these ancient civilizations back then, because, somebody one day just thought up usury, right? We're going to level interest on loans. But Babylon itself, of course, was a mighty place of its day, and usury was an inherent part of it. But it led to problems. The problems that it led to are the problems that we are enduring today. And fundamentally, there's nothing new under the sun. The form changes. The technology around money transactions and recording has changed, of course, out of all recognition. They wouldn't have probably been able to envisage things like high speed, fiber optic networks and digital currencies and all this kind of stuff. But in the end, I also think it's not worth getting too bamboozled by that, because the basics have remained the same. And in simple terms, those merchants that acquire more wealth than all the other merchants have historically always formed cartels to strengthen their hand, which has been at the expense of the other smaller merchants, but mainly at the expense of the people as a whole. And so as these civilized setups mature, so does the misery, you could say, of the normal people, because the leveling of the charging of interest on a loan, effectively what it does in simple terms is it puts more and more purchasing power in fewer and fewer hands. That's all it does. It's like an engineering principle. So the leveling of interest on loans is very, very dangerous. And any church worth its salt in the past prohibited it with excessive punitive penalties, including death and all sorts. You weren't allowed to do it. In fact, in England, I don't know what date it would have ended, but up to the 1600s, if you issued a mortgage, you could be hung for issuing mortgages. You weren't allowed to do it because it was understood. Of course, this has been, obscured and pushed to the back, that if you allow the charging of interest on loans to develop within a nation, it'll kill it. That's basically what it does do. It's like another analogy worth thinking about, like on a biological level, is leukemia is a hellish disease. It's the cancer of the blood. And it's so hellish because obviously blood's, traveling through every part of your body. It's supposed to bring nutrients to it, a bit like finance is supposed to bring strength to all the little villages and everything like that. But it carries a disease with it. And so usury is a bit like leukemia of the civilization. It infects everything. And it creates all these sort of bogus scenarios, pressure points that should not exist, because on a biological analogy level, still, we are diseased. It's a disease, literally, and it causes dis-ease, and it puts people under stress. And the people that start off the game with the most money win. Not because they necessarily have to be the most skilled, but just mathematically, they're going to win. It's as if you and I were to sit down and play poker, and I've got £10,000, but you've got £800 trillion. I have to go on a streak of luck so long to make any mark in the game that it's just not going to happen. And that's kind of how it works. So they've built up this massive power base, not without setbacks for them. These have happened along the way. But of course, it's matured now into a situation in the world where primarily the city of London controls most of that. Wall Street has been a place where much of the sort of mercantile execution of it has taken place, certainly over the last sort of 150 years, as America grew up in strength, understandably. But it's a networked thing. It doesn't. The geographical location of it is not really that important. I mean, it's useful to know up to a point, but it's a system, and you're not in it. That's the most important thing, and I'm not in it either. And of course, if we look at sort of like political reporting and economic reporting, which I only look at it personally for a laugh, we just hear all these phenomenally brilliant solutions that they're going to come up with to stop inflation and all of them, every single thing that they say is completely, in my view, totally pointless, because it's not addressing the fundamental engineering fault at the heart of the system. They never, ever talk about the bank. Ever. They never, ever talk about the bank. All they talk about in politics is, well, the one in the 70s and the 80s was inflation. We've got to get inflation down or whatever. And then they're always talking about economic growth. They talk about that all the time, as if we don't grow, everything's going to be terrible. But of course, under a usury system, they're right. You have to keep running faster and faster, like the proverbial hamster in the wheel, to keep generating income to pay off not only the debt, but also this artificial, bogus, and totally onerous thing on top of the debt called interest. And that's the problem. I mean, I've only touched on all the key, so many different bits, I suppose, but you know, it's a real challenge. And of course, I think one of the other challenges from a communication point of view is it's fundamentally boring. I think it really is fundamentally one of the most boring topics ever. People don't want to talk about it. And I guess I don't really mean boredom. I think it's actually got a really deep and horrible emotional charge about it, because if you talk to people about money, or most of us about money, the first thing that's going to come up for the vast majority of people is a sense of lack, never having had enough of it to handle the bills, so that you had long stretches of your life where you were at peace and not being pestered by the bills. It's an unpleasant thing. And I would suggest it's designed to be unpleasant, keep us permanently off balance to some degree, and therefore make us that much more controllable. So apart from the fact that they get all the wealth, which they don't need, it's not so much that they need the wealth, it's that what they need is for you to not have it. That's what it does.
Yeah.
It's to make sure that you don't have the purchasing power, that you don't have the freedom to start doing your own independent thinking, because that just wouldn't do. Then they're not going to listen to us. So let's stop that. And it's one of these very many pressures that bear down upon us. But I would say in the sort of in the pragmatic realm, it's the biggest. For me, it is anyway, from the things I've read about it. And all of my, you know, when we were talking about all the biblical stuff and everything, that came to me because I initially started off researching banking like a maniac 25 years ago. And not because I was interested in fractional reserve banking systems, but because I knew, because it'd been shown to me, that this is where the power lies in terms of managing our lives daily. And it's just obvious. And of course, it's now becoming obvious to an ever increasing number of people with every passing hour. I'm sure of it. But it wasn't so well known as a sort of normal conversation piece when I first started talking about it to people I knew back in the 90s. Most of them thought I'd gone mad, really. But that was just the way it went.
And I think it's a valid point you've made, because, you know, you can only have so much money to I mean, what can you spend it on? How many yachts, how many islands, how many big houses can you live in at one time? So it's not so much about them having more and more money. Like you said, it's to prevent us having it, and that gives them the power, and it enslaves us, which makes sense. And if you think over the last, well, it's 5 years now, since 2020, what happened, and they were dishing out this furlough. Furlough was a word I've never heard of before, and they were dishing out this furlough time and time again. You know, you think, where's the money coming from? Well, we know, you know, you can pick it off a tree. And then people were so happy to receive this money and sit on their backsides and watch Netflix all day, but they didn't have that foresight to think, well, we're going to have to pay that back. Again, that's enslaving us, that's trapping us. It's the same as, like, in my opinion, when students go to university now, they have that debt. They never used to have that debt, but now they have that debt. So, you know, they're in the system, they're on that hamster wheel, aren't they? That's the same sort of thing.
Very much so. I mean, the whole of the student debt thing, of course, is it ticks an awful lot of boxes for the other side. They can say, oh, well, unemployment's down. It's not really. They've swollen the university population colossally. They've created a culture where they say, well, you must go to university. I wouldn't have my sons go to university at all. I wouldn't even know. And if I had children today, they wouldn't even go to school. No two ways about it. I mean, the whole thing's broken intentionally. And of course, they end up with a completely controllable, degree-ridden young population who are supposedly going to go on and start managing the country at some level. And they're all in debt up to their eyeballs in it. I don't know what it is, average when they 20 odd grand, is it? I've never been in debt to that amount in my entire life. It terrifies me, the idea of that. And yet they blithely go into it, you know.
They do, and they're indoctrinated. I think many of them are indoctrinated into the system, so they've got these blinkers on, so they can't do critical thinking. And I met when one of my sons, my kids didn't go to uni at all, and I was very pleased. I didn't encourage us to go out and learn. Yeah, it was a hurrah. Or college. I think one went to college. But I know one of my son's friends, he went. He wanted a degree too. I don't know, to be a doctor or something. So there was an aim at the end, not just to get a degree and then, you know, have a gap year and all that. But I'd say to him, well, what about the debt? And he said, well, if you don't earn over a certain amount, you don't have to pay it back. So I will intentionally not earn over whatever it was, 70 grand, 100 grand, I can't remember. And I thought, well, you've got that mindset already. You know, you're not even striving for to better your life or to be ambitious and go as far as you can to be the best of yourself, because you've got that
Mhm.
mindset of, well, I'm not going to be as good as I could be because I don't want to pay that debt back. So it's you know, it's bonkers.
It is, and of course, it's all part. It then dovetails into their abuse of the so-called education system, the dumbing down of it in so many different ways. It's not that young people of today are any more stupid or any more intelligent than people in the past, but they're going to become more stupid because of the circumstances that they're placed in. Not all of them as well. They're going to be exceptional people. There always are throughout history. They're born, you know, I don't know what the percentage is. It's very, very small. But I mean, when I left school in 1978 at the ripe old age of 18, um, at that time in England, anyway, I'm assuming it's probably across the whole of Britain at the time, only 3% of everybody that left the upper sixth, as it was referred to back then, went on to university. 3%. That's 1978. I understand recent figures, certainly over the last 10 years, that it's 33%, and probably even higher than that. So what we are being expected to swallow down is that there's been an 11-fold increase in students who are academically gifted enough to go off and pursue degree courses in skilled areas. But when you look at the courses that they take, it's clearly not the case. There's just junk. Half of it is complete junk, particularly things like social sciences and all this equality crap. It's just Marxist indoctrination. And of course, it's being given to them by Marxist duped teachers who are all, it's not that they're unintelligent, but they're stupid. They're not wise. They're very bright. They're articulate. They're thoroughly well stocked in knowledge, but it's to what end? And they've not really sussed that out. And they're basically feathering their own sort of nest of doom. In my view, you know, I can't see the point in knowing these things. Apart from which, I would also suggest that the great breakthroughs in all sorts of stuff generally come, this is just me being a bit of an old fart, really, but I'm still addicted to the idea of the English eccentric, the guy that goes down to the potting shed and his wife doesn't see him for 16 years because he's smelly or something. But when he comes out, he's just invented the hovercraft or a jump jet or something like that. I'm being a bit silly. I know it takes a lot more than just that, but the idea of the independent thinker to me is very attractive. I want to be around people that independently think, even if I don't agree with them. It's so stimulating because it gives me something to even disagree with, and it throws me back to discover any errors, you know, that I may have made, which is all the time. And we're always making them, aren't we? So, you know, once you've got the common sense to go, right, I got that wrong, let go of that. That's a great gift. That's kind of, I think that's a part of wisdom, is that you've got to go, wow, it's not about being right all the time. It's about maintaining a really sound attitude to how I can work with other people to improve things. And that includes improving me and them. And, you know, when you share conversation with people that are independent thinkers, I find that the conversation is just so much richer. It's not full of pap, and it's certainly not full of sort of Marxist claptrap. I mean, it's beyond belief to me that people can actually believe in such a thing as equality, for example, which there's no such thing. I mean, it's never ever existed. I'm not aware of it as an event having ever existed ever in the whole of known creation. In fact, it's the total opposite. Life absolutely cannot exist in the presence of equality. It only exists where things are unequal. Therefore, you have differentiation like light and dark, and to various different degrees. No orange is the same as any other orange. They're just not. They go, we've got all these orange. Yeah, but everyone's slightly different. This one's sweeter and that one's sour or whatever, you know. Isn't that what's wonderful about it? So why would you pursue an ideology that is to make people stupefied and pursue a sort of
Yeah,
uniform universalist nonsense? And of course,
yeah,
this is what we're up against, as embodied by the manure that pours out of the orifice of Klaus Schwab and these other complete, highly clever simpletons, really, in a
yeah.
way. And they're vicious as well with it. But, you know, I tend to view it as a disease. I'm serious. I think
Yeah.
it's a mental illness.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
not sort of, it's not an insult. I view them as mentally ill. Like all these women that are in charge of LA, they're all communists and Marxists, the police chief and all of them. They're not fit for purpose, yet there's an entire coterie, a support system that they've developed over a long period of time to ensure that people like that. It's not just the women, by the way, but it just happens to be
Yeah.
in this
Sure.
case. And
Yeah.
they all agree with one another, and they're all so humorless. Have you noticed how not funny any of them are? Then
They're
would
like
you want to go to a
robots.
party with any of them? I mean, they're dull
Yes,
as ditch
I
water.
would, because I know what I'd be doing. Yeah, but they are, and you wonder if they are human. But just talking about the equality again on my little travels here, I met somebody, lovely young girl, 22-year-old, and we were having dinner, and she said she is one of she's a quadruplet. I said, "You're a what?"
Wow.
Yeah, I've never come across a quadruplet. Okay, a twin and a triplet, maybe a quadruplet. And it was so interesting because, okay, they all came out. Obviously, they had help having, her mother had help having the babies, but all the eggs took. So there's four of them. And she said how they're all so different, so there isn't anything such as equality. It's not natural, is it? Four people
No.
being born at the same time, all totally different, independent. They look different. She said they act different. Their personality is different. So yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree with you.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
It's
also through education they try and knock out creativity, don't they? Which is where it is. These extroverts or introverts or these people that are just think
they do.
differently. The
They
rebels,
absolutely
they
do.
yeah
And they
they
don't
come out with.
teach. They don't teach any of us. You know, I'm working on the basis you went to school. I did.
Yeah.
Most of the listeners here, at some point, wherever they are in the world, I assume have gone to school. Maybe some of them are still there. Jolly good on you. But
Mm.
you will not have been taught anything about banking at school. Nothing.
No, no,
Now,
or
you
even
go,
how we
well,
change
do I need to know about that? I'm going, might be useful, given that your entire life is going to be dominated, like what we were talking about earlier, 10 minutes ago, by
Mm,
bills.
mm,
Your life is going to be controlled through your ability to meet bills and satisfy the demand for payment for things, which you also don't have too much control over. And yet you don't know how the actual monetary creation system works. Do you think that omission is intentional? I.e., that you don't teach
yeah,
students about it? Well, of course it is.
yeah,
Of course it's intentional. And even on an economics course, I think, not that I've taken one, excuse me, but on an economic degree course, they may spend an hour looking at the central banking system. Um, I've spent tens of thousands of hours looking at the central banking system. Not that I would advise it to anybody. It's really, really exhausting. But the background story to it, the history about it, the personalities and how they did it, that's not. And I think, you were talking about retention of things and information, all that kind of stuff. For me personally, it's internally in my head, I've got a story. There's a storyline in my head from Babylon right up to today. And as you fill it in with all these different incidents from history, you begin to see the pattern. There really is fundamentally nothing different about human behavior. The people get to a position of power and they become addicted to holding that power and will hold it no matter what, including murder, death, poisoning, all the other horrific things that are going on, the control of children, the corruption of politicians through the abuse of children, all of these terrible, sick things that we see in the world. They are very much a sort of result of coteries, groups down through the ages, thousands of years here, passing on a kind of control mechanism, understanding how to dominate, normal people, and they won't let go of it. I can kind of understand that, but it doesn't help the situation. It's like a very mature, long-standing disease. And banking and finance, they wouldn't have been able to do it without controlling banking and finance. It's as simple as that. So it's very important, I think.
it's very important, and I think a lot of people still believe that the government, creates the money, but that just isn't the case, is it? That's a massive lesson for many that don't realize that. Can you tell us a little bit about where the money actually does come from? Who is controlling it?
Sure. Well, I mean, if anybody goes off and does some research, they'll probably bump into a bit of legislation that says no, 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 no. The British government doesn't own it. It was national. They'll say the Bank of England was nationalised in 1948. This is just piffle. It's irrelevant. What they put out to tell their stories are not to be taken seriously at all. You can't trust them. It's the fox telling the chickens how to live in the hen house. It's just not going to work out right. Okay, so and you only have to look at the behavior of our chancellors of the exchequer to see that they're either highly mentally unstable or somebody else is pulling their strings. And the truth is, somebody else is pulling their strings. You remember that politician that we had who became prime minister for about 47 days or something, Liz Truss, about 2 years ago or something, or 3 years, I don't know. Well, Liz Truss is a bit goofy, I think, as a communicator, not unintelligent, but she never really came across very well, not in terms of the smarmy world of politics. She's not really suited for all that kind of stuff. And the knives were out for almost the minute she was chosen to head it up. But she came out with a budget. Now, I've not actually gone through it, but from some people say it's actually not half bad. But she ran into a problem, which I suspect is one of the reasons why she only lasted for about 47, 48 days. And she was on a radio show with a guy called Steve Bannon, who's an acolyte of Trump's and may well be muscling his way around the White House in a few days' time when all this nonsense takes place. And she was on his radio show. I think it was January of last year. It's only about a year ago. And she was talking to him about what she wanted to do when she became prime minister. And she found out there's a thing called the Office of Budgetary Restraint, I think it is, or budgetary recording or something like that. And she found that she couldn't do very much at all because they had to approve or disapprove certain things. Not only that, she said, and this is such a telling thing, and I think it's one of the best things I've ever heard out of the mouth of anybody who's a prime minister, right? Which is a bit ironic considering she was so short-lived. She said, I found that the governor of the Bank of England could not be sacked, but the prime minister could. She said, in a democracy, what that means is that the governor of the Bank of England has got more power than the prime minister. And I went, bingo, hello. So that's a first little chink. Hello. And of course, the governor of the Bank of England is placed there by the people that own the bank. He's not even the big cheese either. He's not a Dumbo. I know they're not Dimbos, right? They understand all this kind of stuff because they got to run the game well, and it's complex, the way that they play it. But there are others that place these individuals into these positions. And so what would be good to teach all British school children, and you can come up with a parallel for the United States as well with regards to the Federal Reserve, is the place that provides all our money is owned by effectively alien foreign powers and investment houses, and has been for a long time. And they ultimately control and dictate the affairs of your nation to such a degree that you can kiss goodbye any idea of you having economic autonomy. You haven't got it. They haven't had it for a long time. And it's the hellish relationship as it's developed between the mediocre individuals that go into politics. That's the only way to describe them. They're not stupid, but they lack the real level of character and integrity needed to change things. What they do is they pretend to the audience, which is their job. These are actors selected for the roles, that they're going to change this, they're going to change that. And I level that criticism at Trump. He's not in control. I don't care what anybody says. I don't go for any of them. I've never voted in my life because these people promise things that they could not ever deliver. They're not in charge. And so they get up there, they do this. It's like a good cop, bad cop thing. They go up there and promise us a lot of things. People go, oh, that would be nice. I'm going to relieve tax here. We're going to stop that. When they get in, they don't do any of them. They never have done any of the things they've ever promised to electorates, as far as I'm concerned, ever. Yeah. And if they do, they don't even let you know about it. It's all weird. It's designed to be weird. There's no sense of kind of respect in the communication with the electorate. Their relationship with the electorate is one of abuse. And the electorate somehow don't want to confront this because they've bought into this fantasy that, mummy and daddy government are going to sort it all out. Well, they are going to sort it out, but to their benefit and not to yours. So that's kind of how it works. The creation of the money is basically in the hands of the private banking families, literally, that are in control of these institutions and all the other agencies around them, all of which are dependent upon them to get paid. I mean, if we boil it down to really, really simple stuff, all of the people that are in the world that are working for the destruction of it right now, the globalization of it, which no sane person wants, in my view, No one wants it unless you've been suckered into all their lame sort of reasons for why this is such a good idea. All of them are complete lies and totally unnecessary. But as you get suckered into that sort of world and go along with it, you get caught up and lost in it, the whole thing. And the politicians can't affect that. They can't change it to how it's supposed to be. And I don't know if I'd mentioned here in the previous conversations, there have been nations where, for a brief momentary spell, they've been run by people who put the economy, the fruits of the economy, the first people that got the fruits of the economy were the people of the nation. And the elites hate this. And so in every single case, those nations have been literally bombed into oblivion. Literally, directly.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
happens to them.
Yeah, Gaddafi comes to mind. We did just I think we did briefly talk about it in one of our chats.
I think we did,
So
didn't we?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's interesting going back to Liz Truss. I saw an interview recently of her explaining, you know, her situation, and I think she's put a cease and desist order out on Mr. what's his name, Keir Starmer, because he keeps blaming her for the state that we're in at the moment, and which is quite funny. And I don't know if you've seen the video, but it's very interesting because she is actually, it's like she knows what's going on and she's jumped ship. She's like on our side. So I think she needs to watch her back a little bit. But yeah, good cop, bad cop. Same as like you're saying with Trump, everything's, oh, he's our savior and everything. I think he's a good cop. I think there's going to be changes, but he is one of them. He's one of them, although he doesn't come across. And he's very ambitious at the moment, isn't he? Trying Greenland, was it Greenland, Canada, Panama Canal? So maybe taking us over.
Yeah, it's all going to be lovely and super and wonderful, marvelous, and it's so
No.
necessary. It's all completely unnecessary. None of it is
Yeah.
required at all,
Yeah.
because it's not going to get rid of the disease, which are the diseased political class. They are a disease, and then their controllers, you know, behind them, who are the financial power, and it's the money power, which is the best phrase I've got for describe. The money power is the problem, and it's nothing new. There's nothing new about this.
No. And this might lead me into this next question. I just sent it to you because it came up on one of the little Telegram groups. Somebody said, if a certain race is secretly running our governments, why are they so supportive of the Muslim, another, you know, the Muslims?
Oh
Did
yes.
you get that? Yeah. I mean, can you elaborate on that? Because there is a chap who is very supportive of this certain race and very pro-Israel, I believe, and whatever. And it's such a difficult subject because I know we've got to be careful what we say and how we say, and not offending anybody. I mean, I don't want to offend anybody, but sometimes you have to. What do you think's going on there? If I can leave that one over. If I can
Well, I don't think we have to offend people. I think it's almost unavoidable if people are offended by truth or by being in the presence of people who won't accept what's given to them from the horse's mouth and go, look, I'm just getting history here from the victor's point of view. That's not good enough for me. I know it's good enough for you, big crowd over there, but I don't trust you either because none of you have got your questioning hat on. And if you don't use that, we're lost. You're just going to believe these people again and again with what they've said. So, yes, I mean, with regard to that, it is complicated, but there's a history of how do we phrase this? I don't know what words to use to describe. There's a history of Muslim people being used in that role. Let's go back into history a little bit. I don't know if I've mentioned the Byzantine Empire. Have we talked about them, those guys?
Byzantine. Okay, no, we haven't.
I say
You and I haven't.
I say Byzantine. Some people say Byzantine.
Tomato.
Yeah,
That's fine. We know.
that's right. It's like a Byzantine plot is indicative of great complexity. And Byzantium was the name of the place. It's the longest lasting empire we know of, which is interesting because it's not taught in any school again. Not taught. I never learned much about the Byzantines at school at all. Not that I would probably have been paying attention. I've been too keen thinking about ice creams at lunchtime and stuff like this, you know. But it's longer lasting than Egypt or anything. Starts about 300, maybe even earlier than that. It's over 1,000 years, about 1,200 years long. You can look it up. It's very long. And of course, the epicenter of it is Constantinople, which we now know as Istanbul. Now, there were Ezra Pound, the poet, don't know if you ever heard of him, wonderful guy, wrote about money. right, you'll find, bizarrely, it was bizarre when I first started coming across it, many of the great writers understood exactly the money problem in the 1800s and the early 1900s. They were drawn to it because these are intelligent, independent thinkers, just the sorts of people that the control system does not want. Doesn't want this, doesn't want independent thinkers. Pound did a lot of research into money. And in fact, he's an amazing character. He's one of my top 5 guys ever. I absolutely, I'd love to meet him one day. Hopefully that will come about. And he he was based over here in the early 1900s, and he got to grips with what was happening with the British Empire. And he wrote some savage pieces about the families that own the British banking system, who are aliens. Let me just put it that way, right? They're not directly wholly British. And he wrote some vicious stuff, which I couldn't say on air, but I'll send you the documents afterwards. And because it's wholly accurate, we're not here to create pointless distress, just good distress. Pointful distress would be better. And basically what he said, you've squandered your entire empire for this filth in short terms. That's what he said. What have you done? You've squandered the whole thing. This is true. Churchill, unfortunately, was their agent after about 1928. Because like all political people, he was compromised because he was in debt. He was an inveterate drunk. He was a sodomite. He was a gambler. He gambled heavily on stock exchanges and foreign exchanges, was up to his eyeballs in debt. And so when someone comes in and bails you out, they got control of you, right?
Yeah.
They've just got control. The borrower is servant to the lender. And that's really what he became. And unfortunately, this skewed him even more than he was already skewed. And we ended up with all sorts of hellish things happening, which, of course, because he wrote the history, everybody thinks it was good. And I've gone up my own tailpipe here and lost where I was starting. Where were we? We're just going, I'm just tracking back.
Can I pause you whilst you might think? Let me come in here, because I know when we last met last year, all in the pub, good old pub, the Gun, you mentioned reading a book, which I actually ordered and read. I'm going to put it here, because when you're talking about Churchill, called Hellstorm by Thomas Goodrich, what a read. I mean, you said it's very disturbing to read it, but it's what happened after the war to the Germans, which is horrifying. Some of the stuff that happened in that book is kind of worse than what happened during the Holocaust. And I think, and you get movies about, what went on during the war, and, all the horrible things, but you don't get movies about what happened after to the Germans, and what Churchill wanted to do. Churchill and who was it? Stalin, and was it Eisenhower at the time?
Eisenhower, yeah.
Yeah, they just want you to eradicate them. It's unbelievable. And so I just thought I'd mention that. Maybe that'll give you time to think about where you were going, or maybe that's just thrown you off track altogether.
No, it's great. I'm so thrilled that you've read it. I'm serious. And when you get back and we meet face to face, we can talk about it a bit more. I mean, it's I would recommend it to anybody who's got a strong stomach and a cool brain, because it's a distressing book. I found it very distressing to read when I first read it in 2014. And Thomas Goodrich, the author, became a very good friend of mine. I ended up narrating an audiobook. I actually recorded that. It's about 17 hours long or something. And Tom passed away, unfortunately, a few months ago. I miss him greatly. I miss him greatly. He was he was a historian. Like, he basically just never accepted the court history of anything, so went off and plowed his own furrow. And that's why I think it's one of the most important books that Western Christian people could read. You need to know, if you want to know what we're really up against, how depraved and cruel and vicious the enemy will behave towards us, is in this book. This is not long ago. I mean, these events took place 15 years before I was born, and that's not long. It's not long. It's
that's what's
last
so scary. Yeah, while I'm talking, I'm putting it on there again if people did want to invest in it. I mean, I did get it from the Jungle Shop, unfortunately, but I got it the next day so I could take it with me and read, and I couldn't put it down. And a lot of people, I was on a retreat as I was reading it, but again, that's the balance, isn't it? There you are on a nice spiritual, which I could talk about that retreat, and then in your quiet moments you're reading about hell on earth, and it is. And what really scares me is that what one human being can do to another. It's just, you know, we all have that shadow side, and it's unbelievable. And like you said, it's less than 100 years ago. It's recent.
It
But
is,
yeah,
and it all dovetails into this one story, basically, which we're skirting around, which we're right to do. We don't need to go in directly on it. I think it's best to just keep sort of throwing out little sort of tidbits and
yes,
little clues about things. People will work it out in the end. But that book, in a way, is uh, the hellish passages in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is full of scenes of horrific decimation and battle and slaughter. It's never really ended. And the latest, you know, the latest major chapter of that was the war in Europe from 39 to 45. But of course, for the Germans, it went through to 47. More, the point worth making here briefly is that more Germans died immediately after the war because of Allied policy, intentional policy, than during it. You get your brain around that.
I
Than
know
during it.
it's then during it. It's absolutely shocking. It's absolutely shocking. So I
It
think,
is,
you
and
know,
these are our brothers. But I was talking about the Byzantines, wasn't I? And Ezra
yes,
Pound,
yes, yes.
and Pound would have loved Hellstorm as well. But loved is probably the wrong word, but he would have known it for what it was. And anyway, yeah, Pound uh, plays a big role in all of the research into banking, because it's worth just saying a few things about him. He was a poet. He was a literary genius in a way. Without him, James Joyce's Ulysses would be even more incomprehensible than it already is. He was an editor. So he was working in London in the early 1900s, I think 1910s, early 1920s, this kind of thing. But he was politically extremely sensitive and knew about power structures. He must have moved in good circles. Obviously, he was a highly intelligent man and would have been wanted at dinner parties and things like this. So he would have been picking stuff up. I don't know a great deal about his personal life at the time. He moved to Italy, and he did a whole series of broadcasts for Mussolini, basically waging verbal war on Churchill and Roosevelt. Okay. So this is a very brave man who saw, in my view, people would disagree, saw what was at the root of the problem. And it does tap into banking, because he wrote about that in the 20s. He knew what the root of it all was in a comprehensive way. And he did all this series of broadcasts, much to the chagrin, of course, of the special operatives in America, who arrested him after the war. And he was sentenced, I can't remember how many years, to an insane asylum. And he's not insane, but they locked him up in solitary confinement for years.
Oh.
But he was allowed visitors. One of these visitors is a guy called Eustace Mullins, who was a writer. And I don't know how they first connected, but he brought Mullins in, and Pound still had money coming in from sales of his books and things. And so he asked Mullins to go off and research the Federal Reserve. This is the first book that we're aware of where the banking system was researched. And it was easier to research it in the States because things were still a bit more open back then. We're talking 1946, 47, 48, immediately after the war. And he wrote a book called The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, which is worth reading. You can probably pick up a free PDF somewhere on the internet if you're into this kind of thing. But it's the very first one, really. So Mullins did the world a massive favor. And when I think in some of his interviews, he says he didn't understand why Pound wanted him to go off and research banking. Because we're literary people, right? We want to write poetry and stories and things. No, banking. And in this research, and also the research that Pound was doing, he began to look into the Byzantine Empire, maybe because he was writing poetry with a Byzantine flavor. I don't know, I don't know. I'll find out maybe over the next little period. He discovered certain principles that the Byzantines employed, which strongly suggest are the primary reasons for why it lasted so long. It lasted long because it was stable. It was stable because it had stable governance. It had a clear set of laws, and everybody knew. Here's the 4 rules. Aliens, that is anybody outside of the race/culture of the Byzantine people, were forbidden from occupying any positions of power in the following 4 fields: banking, government, education, and the law. Banking, government, education, and the law. Education, so they couldn't pervert the minds of the young. The law, so that they could not pervert law and get away with things, right? And corrupt judges. Banking, because it would have destroyed the entire nation. And government, because they would have led it astray. It lasted over 1,300 years. Now, when it fell, and this is coming back to that point you mentioned in that comment, when it fell to the Turk. That's why it's now known as Istanbul. And it fell to the Turk because figuratively and literally in many cases, the gates, as it were, the barriers to the Byzantine Empire were opened by the Jews. And this is the same policy that the Jews did in Spain. The Moors were able to take over Spain because the walled towns and villages, the gates at night, were opened by Jews that were living there to allow the Muslims in. Now, I've spoken to a person for years about this and get nowhere, so I don't speak to him about it too much. But he says, no, that doesn't make any sense. Why would they bring in Islamic people who historically we perceive are the great enemy of the Jewish people? Well, at times, yes. But opportunities present themselves and they're made use of in this way. So now we get on to, obviously, we're even touching in onto the Muslim rape gang thing that's been swirling around here for decades. Actually, it's just in the news, right? This sick situation over here. This is no different. Just anybody wants to go and look at how Spain was overthrown with the Moors, and the same with, and it's not just same with Byzantine, and there'll be other places as well, which I don't have to cite right now. It's always the same dynamic. Another sort of proxy army is brought in that disturbs the home nation and brings it to ruin. And so, and it just has to be mentioned. This is a matter of historical fact. People can have opinions at all. In the UK, the doors to it opening here, and this shows you the pernicious effect of controlling banks. It's all about controlling banks, enable all these other horrific things to take place, which they then distance themselves from. But the Race Relations Act was changed in 1965, I think it was here. And the person that championed it was Jewish, Lord Leicester. At the same time in America, in the 60s, there was a thing called the Hart-Celler Act. Edward Kennedy was the guy that did all the gobbing off in the House of Representatives to get it passed through. But the people behind it were Jewish again. Now, why? You see, prior to 1965, America took people in, but they had to be European because they were still connected to the truth of the law of the Bible, I'm going to suggest, right? Big stretch for people. You know, what are you talking about? The Bible forbids us, as I was mentioning, the Bible is our book. It's nobody else's. Whoever pretends to, it's certainly not a Jewish book at all, right? But they pretend that it is. They've been pretending this for an awful long time, and people, sometimes, a lot of our own people believe this, and it's understandable why they would. But one of the laws there is that you do not allow aliens to live with you. Because it says, I think it's in Deuteronomy, if they do, they will become the head, you will become the tail, and back to banking, they will lend to you, but you will not be able to lend to them. Tell me what's going on right now in our countries. It's all there. So there's literally nothing new under the sun. But many of the resource points that we need to be reading have been so denigrated, so spun away from people, so subdued, made boring and dull and tedious and of no interest. Oh, you don't need to read all that old stuff. That's exactly what you need to read. It's exactly what needs to be simplified and made more. And we need to familiarize the young with a true understanding of what these documents are about. There's even a strong argument that a core part of Christ's mission was to overthrow the money class, because his first public act was to whip the money changers at the temple. This is his first day out and about in public, right? I don't know anybody in my life that's whipped bankers in public. You know any? It's quite a thing to take a whip to people. It's like I go down the stock exchange, I go down the bank, and get in there, and I start whipping them and turn all their tables over. This is not that that's a house of God; it's a house of mammon, now. But and hence we get that phrase, to turn the tables on people, which is where it comes from. That whole first couple of days, he's effectively attacking, when you read it right, the money class of the day, because there is a solution to world financial problems. But we've got to overcome another problem first before we apply it. The other problem being the people that are in charge of the system. But the solution is a thing called the Year of Jubilee, where all debts are forgiven. And people, we can't do that. You can, actually. Where there's a will, there's a way. But you see, there's literally no will because the will has been frittered away, subdued, confused, distracted, and full of drama. And people can't almost think long enough to actually work out a solution to their problems. But it's right there in front of us. You forgive all the debts. You just forgive them because if you don't, and this is what Babylon found under Hammurabi, where they wrote down these first codes and laws for civilized living. If you do not do that, what happens is, and it's happened here, you end up with a patrician class, a moneyed class, the elite mercantile class, call them what you in, the super capitalists of the world. You know, George Soros would be one. You can name a few that you know, but there'll be many, many others that never appear in the papers. There'll be thousands of these buggers all over the place, right? And they're in a massive big club and they're just running everything. When you get those people, the creditors, the ones that are owed money in large quantities, they basically run your nation because they can dominate and dictate to the governing class. In other words, democracy is a joke because people go around and go, I've got our representatives in, our party won. Yeah, you can't do anything, mate. Why? Because he's not told you about this group over here behind the curtain or several curtains that are going to come to him in the dark of the night in 3 weeks' time, and they're going to make him an offer literally that he can't refuse. They're all controlled through perversions, as now is becoming obvious. You know, half of them are pedophiles. That's why they're selected. They only want to select pedophiles because they can control them, or, you know, sodomites or whatever it is that they've got. Yeah. This is all disgusting. It's wretched. And this is also why we've been forbidden to talk about it. Oh, you can't say these things. It's hurtful. They're the ones that instituted this control of free speech to stop us thinking about what the real problem is, which is this.
It's like they're panicking. It's in a way, it's like they're panicking when they with this free speech issue. It's crazy. I could tell you lots of stories of people that I've met here that have tried to. I mean, just briefly, I met a chap the other week, and he complained. He was in a restaurant in Germany, and he put a complaint in, I think, on Google or TripAdvisor or something. Well, he had a vegan with him, and so the vegan ordered the meal, and the carnivore ordered the meal, but the vegan meal was cooked in the same pan as the meat, and they complained. And they complained because it's a genuine thing that happened. They put it on TripAdvisor or Google, wherever it was. They put a complaint in, and then the hammer came down on them, and they were fined. And they said this could be actually an arresting case. We could actually arrest you for doing this. So, which is ridiculous because this is something that happened, but it's talking about the freedom of speech. You know, we've got to be so careful because of they're coming down on us. And to me, it's a sign that they, you know, they're backing off a little bit because we're getting there. But when you said the year of Jubilee, now can you tell me a little bit more? I know we're coming up to like the hour, I may be going over, and there's loads more I want to talk about. But if we can just do the year of Jubilee, and then we can come back and do another chat, if that's okay.
Well, when you have this patrician class that has owed all the money, what happens is that people, for example, would not be able to pay their rent, their land rent, farmers. Right. I'm just going back. We've got to go back a few thousand years. They couldn't keep up the payments. So they would lose their property and the land would go over to the creditor class. A bit like Bill Gates today, buying it all up, right? And this is very, very damaging to the king because now, you go back 3,000 years, the way you defended your nation was with men with spears, axes, bows and arrows and fighting spirit. And so men working on the land naturally are ideally suited to that. They're physically tough, can endure tough conditions. That's why we used to be tougher. Well, I'm not arguing for all that kind of stuff. I prefer it living longer and having more time to think about things, but you know, needs must. And so this is a direct threat to the power of the king. How is he going to defend the people that he needs to support him as the monarch or whatever, if this creditor class behind the throne is chewing up the substance of his army? So the kings would issue a year of Jubilee, the forgiveness of all debts. Now, it wasn't necessarily every debt, but it was certainly all the debts that applied to the peasantry, people like you and me, right? Because they were being literally asphyxiated, starved of purchasing power. Of course, we grew up to some degree, oh, you're lazy, work harder, go and get more money. This is a nonsense. The money's not there to earn. You know, it wasn't that people in the Great Depression after Wall Street were lazy. Far from it. They weren't lazy. They designed the system to rob them of what they had. It's a completely artificial event, is the crash of Wall Street. We know this because Churchill was forewarned of it and didn't lose a penny on it. He was told to get all his money out about 4 days earlier by Bernard Baruch, who was his handler, part of the clan, doing the whole thing. So this has happened. So Hammurabi, for example, did have years of jubilee. And when a new king would come along or a prince was about to become the new monarch, they would nearly always issue a year of jubilee, the forgiveness of debts. And what does this do? It reinvigorates life in the nation as a whole. It just comes to life again. You don't realize that you're being asphyxiated until suddenly the oxygen is given back to you. And suddenly people were more relaxed, more energized, more positive, not demoralized about their future life. They could see a future for providing for their wife and their children and all these sorts of things. And this is a good thing because it creates a healthy, virile people who then get more creative and put up wonderful, beautiful buildings and all this kind of stuff that you would like to spend some time during this life doing. So that's why they did it. And interestingly, if you look at, say, Caesar, Julius Caesar, so we know of him, maybe many people know of him from the Shakespearean play, of course, he's stabbed. He's killed. He's assassinated on the steps of Rome. The actual backstory to that is that Caesar obviously was a great general and had been out subduing all the other places like Gaul, particularly where he fought, a lot of wars. And he comes back and he finds in Rome 150,000 people sleeping in the street. This is Rome, the epicenter of the entire, and he's absolutely disgusted by this. He's going, what's going on? We're Romans. We can't have people sitting around. And he finds that basically this creditor class has drained them of their purchasing power. It's just like because it's going to go that way. If you don't put restraints on the creditor class, this is what happens. And the reason why restraints only last temporarily is that the departments of government that are supposed to apply the restraints, the individuals in there get bribed. It's just like leakage. They just get perverted. Oh, yeah. It's okay. We'll let that one go. 20 years go by. The whole thing's like a toilet. So Caesar's plan, and he began to implement it, was to, I don't know whether it was necessarily have a year of jubilee, the forgiveness of all debts, but it was along those lines. So Mark Antony and the other guys that killed him, they were representatives of the creditor class. They worked for them. About 50 of them killed him. And because we want all our money. In other words, once the money's in a person's system, once they are a commercially acquisitive individual, they're in the temple of Mammon, Mammon being the god of money, and the enemies of the people as a whole. And this has always been the case. So your own nation begins to become diseased. It is like a cancer, and it chews up everything. And I understand, cancer is where cells absorb the energy of all the other cells around them and just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, that's exactly what cities are. If you look at cities, they're like cancerous concrete boils, just full of this epicenter of money draining from the rest of the nation. If you just have to step away from the earth, the flat earth for flat people, the globe earth, I don't want to upset anybody, whatever you think it might look, just imagine you're up in space, very high, and looking down, you're seeing all these cities, you're going, ooh, that's a bit of a stinky, and they are. They're not right. There's some, and if we just tap in even on a local level with Dickens, what Dickens books and novels are full of are the individuals who'd been drawn into cities. Because the Industrial Revolution created these, they decide we'll get all the workers off the land and into these tenements where you get these terrible conditions like Oliver Twist and all this kind of stuff. That's what he's talking about. And Dickens, being a court reporter, which is where he learnt his trade from about the age of 19 onwards, he would sit in court and hear these unbelievably horrific stories of people's lives destroyed by this process that the patrician class were running, the great industrial barons, and they didn't give a crap, literally, about the normal people. This is, 150 years ago? Nothing's changed. People shouldn't think anything's changed. It's not changed at all,
Wow. Paul, I think we are going to have to end it there because
Sure.
I think we've gone over the hour. It's fascinating.
Okay.
Honestly, I could listen to you all day. It's amazing what information you bring to the internet or to my little wise women. Yes, wise women weekdays. That's what we're chatting for. I'm just taking.
I like being. I like being a wise woman, but not in that sort of way. I'm, of course, very blokey, but
Very
and it's very
blokey.
odd
Well,
for me.
however
Yes,
you
I'm the token
identify.
male. I'm the token male in the wise women space, so that's okay. I don't mind. That's fine. Yeah.
I'll end on this, talking of that. If you don't identify as a woman, there was a couple on the beach the other day that were chaps, I think, that identified it as women because they had bikinis on, but you could see they were, quite masculine in their bikinis, but they were doing all girly things. And then one of them got up and started to kick a ball around like a bloke would do, like with the knee and the head and and I thought it's quite interesting because what's the saying? You can take the street out of a kid or the kid out of the street or something like that. And I thought he's being a male. He's doing
Mhm.
masculine things. He wants to wear this girly bikini, but it was a bloke. Anyway, I probably shouldn't have said that, but I did because
You did.
you
It's all
started.
over now.
Yeah,
It's ruined the
I
show,
know,
you know.
I
It's
know,
terrible.
I know.
I'm trying to get that image out of my head. I feel a bit ill now.
Do
There's
you? Oh,
no
I'm so
accounting for
sorry.
mental illness, which is all it is. It's mental and behavioral illness. The guy needs to be taken down to a hospital and surgically operated upon or something. I don't know.
It's very sad. That's maybe I think that's close to
It
the
is
end. Well, I
sad.
don't know. It is sad because it is. It's stuff up in the up here. I think not. Anyway, we'll leave that one for another day. I'm gonna wind up now. So for those that are watching this, if you have any questions, please put it in the comments. If you like it, give us a thumbs up. Maybe subscribe to my channel, Wise Women Weekdays, and we will be joined by Paul. With Paul. I'll be chatting to Paul hopefully very soon and giving you more incredible information. So thank you very much, Paul, and I will see you very soon.
You will. Thank you, Karen.
Okay. Okay. Oh, so I'm just trying to turn the record off before ending the meeting. Excuse me if you're still there. Stop recording. There we go.